back from Washington, D.C. She may or may not be able to attend part of our meeting. Some of us will know that based on a text later in the evening. Also, I urge people to take a look at the calendar, which is up. Note that we have an additional Finance Subcommittee meeting scheduled for February 27, please, at 5 o'clock. And we do know that we had a cancellation for the superintendent's parent forum at Driscoll, and so that has yet to be rescheduled, but it will be. If there are no other questions regarding the calendar, I would willingly accept a motion regarding the consent agenda. Dr. Warren has moved. Ms. Cox is second. Thank you very much. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Hearing none, I will consider that business completed. Thank you very much. We have some subcommittee reports, and I know that Ms. Kershaw is going to be a little tardy, so maybe we could start with capital improvements. Ms. Chalupsky.
Thank you, Mr. Morse. I think I'll start with the easy ones. Runkle School. This is all sort of reporting back to you guys from the Building Commission and what went on there on Tuesday. They're still completing the punch list there. They hope to have it done over this February vacation. And there's a lot of closing out, as you'll probably see with all of our projects, for those of you who haven't in the past, the closing out of the project, making sure we get all the manuals, making sure that everything is done appropriately. The commissioning takes time and sometimes can take throughout the year. So that's what's happening now. There's some credits that we're talking about with the contractor that we still haven't come to an agreement on, and there's still some money being held back until everything is done from the contractor, until everything is done. The good news is that the school is running well and that everybody seems to enjoy it, and everybody who comes up to me says, gee, it really looks beautiful, even the neighbors who live around there. So, so that's the good news. The Mass CHIPS, they revised the report and resubmitted, and we're waiting to hear back from them in terms of the how much we will get back from Mass CHIPS. That we came in at the number that we had to come in. We actually, according to our documentation, came in at a higher number, which is better, and we're hoping we'll get credit for all of it.
Was there a problem that resulted in the revision needed?
There was a reason they resubmitted, because they felt that something they had submitted, there was something better they should have put in there, and so the difference was just submitting another check to have it reviewed again. No, because we had it in on time to begin with. I'm going to take the liberty of talking about Heath School because Moscato was at the meeting and can certainly, you know, with any of this, say something, as Mr. Morse was at the meeting. And Mr. Rowe. But I took notes, and so I'll just go ahead and talk about the Heath School, which is also functioning well for in terms of the addition. There's still punch list items, as I referred to in Runkle, the same sort of thing. There's on the outside, the landscaper still needs to do some repair of some work that he did do. And they're working on the final numbers with the contractor, and there will probably be some money in the project to redo the bathrooms and the kindergarten play structure once everything is accounted for, and that's something that both the school and the parents have wanted very desperately to have done. There will be both for Heath and Runkle, a school building committee meeting, I think, just to close out and to talk about these items. The Brookline High School concept study has begun, and should be done by June. That's the target date. These are all small projects that I'm sort of giving you right now. The Unified Arts Building, they're doing sort of what they call forensic work on the facade and the roof to see what it is they need to do. They call it forensic work. I don't think any crimes have been committed, though, so we don't need to worry about that. Yeah, you're welcome. But they are waiting for the report. Many of you may know this is a 100-year-old building, and it's the slate roof that has been there for 100 years. So one of the big questions will be what to do with the roof. It is not leaking presently, but there is, it's getting thin, and so the reports are going to come back from the architectural firm that's looking at all these things, the pointing and the roof. The biggest issue that we talked about at the Building Commission was a presentation by Flansburgh and Associates, I think that's their name, correct? Mr. Rowe? Yeah, it is Flansburgh. And I thought maybe there was another name, Flansburgh, blah, blah, blah. No, just Flansburgh. Mr. Cruz was the architect who was there. And amazingly, in about a week and a half, well, first of all, you'll see that there's a contract here for him. But beyond the contract, he went ahead and did work, with the handshake, that knowing that we were hopefully going to be signing this contract, to do the first part of the project, to look at the modulars for both Baker and Lawrence. And it's truly pretty amazing how much he did do within the short period of time till this last Building Commission meeting, in a week and a half or maybe 2 weeks. There was a presentation, which actually I should probably get out to people here. I think that might be a good idea. And what they did was many variations on a theme of modulars. So they looked at and did some sketches of 2 modulars at Lawrence, 3 modulars at Lawrence, and 4 modulars at Lawrence. They did the same thing with that at Baker, and where they would be sited in order to be the least costly. And I may do some editorializing on here, so you can take what you want from it, in terms of what the appearance and the siting of these particular units. The Lawrence School, the 4 units, which is what we really need for the Lawrence School, would be one on top of the other on the side of the building where the parking lot is, butted up against the building with entrances into the building. So you would access the classrooms through the school and not from the outside. There would be some emergency egress, but the access would be through the school. The Baker one, there were 2 spots that they thought to put them, and both of them were infill spots in quads at the Baker. So one would be next to the kindergarten area, and the other one would be next to the new wing, sort of coming off, sort of making it like 3 coming, I don't know. So you have the wing at the back of the Baker School, you have this coming up here and towards the front, you have the new wing, and then there would be like a 3rd wing coming in the middle, so to speak, about 15 feet apart. The Baker one, to me, doesn't, well, this is my editorializing, I'll make sure you know. It seems to be stuffed in so that the cost would be less, but is really would interfere with the classrooms that are there presently. Kids would be looking out into the other classrooms, that are just a few feet away. It doesn't make sense for the Baker where we have so much space, and we could do a really nice addition if we needed to. So all that to say what was very clear from the building commission was that whatever we decide, if we want anything in there, they were pretty clear that probably anything we would do probably would take until December, at least at the one at Lawrence, that it wouldn't be ready till then. But that if we wanted it to be ready by then, I mean, the building could happen, but then there's all sorts of things like community process, like zoning, those sorts of things that would push the timeline out. The building commission was very clear that if we wanted to do that, we would have to start today, basically. Or, within the next couple of weeks, because otherwise it just keeps on pushing it further and further along. One of the things that I was going to propose, at least for the Lawrence School, would be my sense, is to tentatively set up maybe a timeline where we would, after, and please, I'm going to take questions here too about this, and so will Ms. Scotto and Mr. Morris, to set up a timeline where we would have a community meeting the first week in March, and then the capital subcommittee meets on the 8th of March. We could review it at the capital subcommittee, come up with a recommendation to the full committee for the March 14th meeting. I think if there's a desire to have this happen, and there may or may not be, that's still up, for questioning. I think the thing that people need to remember, these are not temporary structures. They will be permanent, probably for 15 to 20 years. So we need to think about what it is we would really like to have happen. And if we want it to happen, we have to think about it quickly. Ms. Scotto.
Just to echo what Ms. Charlovsky said, the Baker modulars seem to, I think, virtually everybody to be awkward and not really something that would feel as if it would feel like something that had been just stuck in there and wouldn't be in any way integrated into the sort of feeling of the school. Whereas the Lawrence modulars, you had a sense that when they went up, particularly if you used the brick siding, which you can put on them, would look as if they were a reasonable part of the building, and because of the way they were laid out, would function as if they were a reasonable part of the building. And I think though I am not a pro-modular person, I think you could make a case for the Lawrence modulars because it does give you 4 classrooms in what is the most densely populated part of town. I know we need space at Baker, but they didn't feel, those modulars did not feel in any way as if they integrated into the whole feeling of the school. And I think that was a general feeling on the part of the building commission as well as those of us who were there.
Want to stop there for questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Comments?
Yeah.
Any questions or
Sorry,
comments?
Ms. Kershak, I'm a little lazy, didn't hear it, but I'm happy to repeat anything you need to hear. I think the other thing that, if I'm not mistaken, and Mr. Rowe, maybe you can correct me on this one, if we do the modulars at Lawrence, the 4 modulars, it will basically use up our full appropriation for classroom expansion. Is that correct?
I would say no. You remember one of the presentations was that whatever we proceed with, we have the opportunity to enter into a lease purchase.
Oh, I see.
So it could be structured in a way that we could, if you will, finance it over a period of time. So one of the key issues here, actually, in building the CIP is looking at that issue. So I don't think the question of the current appropriation is a problem. We have money this year and we have money next year, and then they would allow us.
So we could do this and still use those monies that are appropriated right now for classroom expansion for other things.
Yeah, we have
Okay,
capacity.
that's an important piece.
Right. One of the things that we're juggling now is looking at what's appropriate space that we can create in the buildings,
Mm-hmm.
what's appropriate space that we may need to end up leasing from other facilities around town, and what's the appropriate decision on a modular. And you may or may not decide that the cost of it is the right value compared to other opportunities. But we have the money in place because we've been able to have a lease purchase, which allows us to spread it over the period of time.
Was there anything else that I didn't say that you would want to add to?
Only that I was impressed also with the speed with which they studied this and what I would describe as the feasibility. Meaning, I believe they certainly convinced me that it's feasible for us to put a multi-classroom structure at both sites. And then the question becomes, what would the issues that we'd feel should push us to not make that kind of a choice, given the way our enrollments are moving. So I thought that in terms of a feasibility study and letting us know what the costs, it was a very helpful piece of information.
Are there other questions about the modulars? Ms. Kershaw?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being late. I just have a question about, at both schools or anywhere we're thinking about adding additional space, will we also have a discussion at the Capital Committee about the impact on the common spaces? In other words, with 4 new classrooms, are we going to change lunch schedules? You know, how will it impact access to gym or playgrounds and those kinds of things? And I know we need the space, so it's going to happen, but I think it's important that when we do it, we're clear that it's going to have, now we're going to have 3 lunch schedules or 4, or what the impact of the additional kids in the schools is on the common spaces.
Well, it may not be additional kids. It may just be housing those kids in more appropriate spaces. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, that's, as you know, knowing what our enrollment's going to be in September is a guesstimate. If numbers were to trend downward a little bit, and we were to proceed with these spaces, one of the things it would do is it would allow the principal, Rick Rogers, to actually reclaim, if you will, for their original purposes, a number of the classrooms, and therefore give him additional space in terms of how to work the building, so that additional space, I think, Rick would tell you if he was standing here, would be very valuable to the Lawrence School if there were no more kids. Whether it's 2 or 3 or 4, we can discuss that. And in my own opinion, the idea of considering the 4 seriously is because it gives us some latitude and some ability to have some flexibility if we were to see continued enrollment growth, which data would seem to indicate we might.
The cost increase for 4 versus 2 is not, I mean, it's substantial, but it's not that, I think it comes out to about $400,000 per classroom if you do 4, and it comes out to about $600,000 per classroom if you do 2. Is it correct? Something like that.
I believe that's right, yeah. I think
Something,
it was-
and that's just the building. Well, that's everything. That was everything. That was everything. The other piece, if you notice in the bills that you're signing, there's one bill for architectural services to look actually at the cafeteria at Lawrence and see about, I assume this is something Charlie's doing?
Yeah, one of the issues that we've been looking at with Rick Rogers is the question of whether the corridor in the basement level adjacent to the cafeteria could be, whether a wall that's there could be removed, allowing for there to be more useful space for the cafeteria. So it's a question that's under review by architects right now. So we're looking at this question to see, what is possible.
Anything else? Any other? Yes.
Dr. Warren?
And what about the infrastructure supports, like the furnace and stuff like that? Do they come with their own heating?
Thank you for asking that question. It's a great question. We actually asked it at the meeting. So these 4 units come with their own heating and air conditioning units, which go on top of the building structure. So I then once more asked, well, how big will those structures be and what will they look like?
They sound like.
I actually reminded the architect that there's a noise bylaw for the town, so they would have to meet those, all town zoning and bylaws. And so that's some of the things that they're going to be looking into.
Well, let me just say that the costs that you've quoted include all the infrastructure, the fixed costs.
The 2.5 would include
Right.
all the, yeah.
So, and that's why the 2 additional units don't cost as much, because they don't have all the stuff that you have to do in the ground. So, yes, Ms. Cotto.
This is just an aside. At Lawrence, they could also retain 5 legal parking spaces.
Correct, and a handicap space.
Illegal ones and a handicap
Right.
space. Illegal only because they would be tandem, but 5 legal ones, which is a plus.
Okay, well, I think that's good for now. That's great. Is that,
I'm actually finished.
great. Thank you very
We have
much.
a lot of work ahead of us,
Yes.
and I would urge that this tentative schedule that I'm putting forward, as soon as, we're confident that this is the way we want to go, we should get it out to people.
Time is of the
Because the
essence.
time is of
Right.
the essence. Time is of the essence for this, time is of the essence for the B-Space Committee to get the old Lincoln ready,
Right.
too. So on both of those.
Okay. Ms. Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Charlepski, for going out of order. The Finance Subcommittee met earlier this week. We discussed 2 items that I think will be covered in some detail later in this agenda. The first was very preliminary concepts related to the ninth school associated with recommendations or thoughts that were going to the B-Space Committee, and I think we'll hear about those in a little while. We also discussed the 2014 budget development process, which I think we'll also be hearing about. We have scheduled an extra finance subcommittee meeting that just got scheduled today for February 27th from 5 to 6 p.m. In furtherance of the 2014 budget development. That concludes my report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kershaw. Curriculum, Ms. Cotto.
The Curriculum Committee met on February 12th this week with Mindy Paolo, who was here to tell us about some state initiatives for the English language learners. She spoke about both WIDA and retail, and I will tell you a bit about them. WIDA is world-class instructional design and assessment. WIDA is a collaborative of states, in fact, including 31 U.S. states and territories, and it's continuing to grow. And it basically is a consortium that provides us with a great deal of support and information about elementary language learners. It has a number of values, and one of the most important is the can-do philosophy. That is to say that the linguistically diverse students who come to our schools have many assets. They make contributions, they have great potential. So instead of looking at them as students who are in need of something, WIDA looks at them as students who need to learn English, but who bring a great deal to the community. One of the things that WIDA has enabled us to do is to access their assessments. Access, ACCESS, and I can't tell you what that stands for, but it is the statewide test that is replacing or has replaced MEPA, which was the test that the ELL students were given each year to assess how much they were learning, what level they were on, and so forth. We are also using WAPT, W-APT, which is a new assessment that will identify and place ELL students when they come, and there's another one called MODEL, again an acronym for something that I can't tell you, that is for the kindergarten level and will be used with all entering students. WIDA also provides a great deal in terms of just professional development and information about second language learners. We, during the course of the meeting, ask about the numbers of second language learners in the Brookline schools, and we're told that we have 744 in the district at the present time, with Korean being the largest ELL population. I'm sorry, Japanese is the largest. Korean is second. Chinese, Hebrew, Russian, and Spanish, those are our language groups at the various, that have specific programs at the various schools. I also want to just tell you one other thing, that there are certain standards that WIDA uses, and their standards have to do with language. The first standard has to do with social and instructional language. But after that, the standards are all around academic language, the language of language arts, the language of math, the language of science, and the language of social studies. So the focus for our ELL learners that WIDA has emphasized is the focus on academic language, so students can be very successful in school. They concern themselves with listening, speaking, reading, and writing, as we would imagine. And I think that Brookline has benefited greatly from being part of this consortium. Now, the other part is the RETEL, which stands for Rethinking Equity and Teaching for English Language Learners. RETEL is essentially is about professional development. It is a mandate by the Massachusetts Department of Education that says that every elementary or core academic teacher who has even one ELL student has to have an endorsement on their certificate. This will begin in 2016. In order to get an endorsement, you have to take a course that's essentially a college-level course. All educators are required to have this. Brookline will be running the course, and so teachers will be asked to sign up for this starting in 2013 and September of 2013. And by 2016, it will have to be an endorsement that all teachers in Brookline, both new and continuing teachers, will have to have on their certificate. This is across the state. We are in the second cohort. Our cohort is the district that is high performing and has high ELL enrollment. So we will start September 13 to begin to prepare for this 2016 mandate. It will be the responsibility of the educator to make sure that they get this certification, but there will be ample opportunity to, within Brookline, to sign up for the courses. The state will pay for the courses, but they will be administered by Brookline. In the future, teachers will again have to have 90 PDPs in your content area, 90 elective PDPs, but 15 of these will have to be in ELL and each year, and 15 will have to be in special ed, as we understand it. So that is the report on the meeting the other day.
Can I just add a piece?
Yes, you, Mandy.
So the piece I'd like to add just for context, RETEL's continuing to evolve. Maureen LaCroix, who was superintendent in Bedford, who now works part-time at the Department of Education, is the administrator in charge of it, and loving getting beat up by her former colleagues over this initiative. But it's important to go back to the origin of this. This is Massachusetts' negotiation with the Justice Department. This is not something the Department of Education one day said, what a great idea, let's do this. It's something that they were compelled to do by some findings of the Justice Department regarding the quality or lack thereof of instruction of students for whom English was not the primary language in schools throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And it is a very difficult piece for us to work with. It certainly will be a very difficult piece for teachers to work with. The bottom line on this is that at the end of the day, because this is a licensure issue, it's owned by the individual teacher. Districts with high concentrations of students like ours will not be able to employ someone who does not have this endorsement as of 2016. And so we're working carefully to try to provide, to make sure that we can provide the course offerings here, but at the end of the day, it's the individual teacher's responsibility, not ours, that they take that and have that endorsement by 2016. And Mindy's doing a great job working with the department to make sure that we can find a number of different configurations with which to offer our teachers the opportunity to take the course. More to come.
Couple more things. Thank you, Dr. Lupini.
Thank you.
I just want to talk about our next meetings on February 28th, which at 4:30, which is an earlier start time than usual because it's the meeting that precedes the school committee meeting that night. The Brookline Early Education Project and Brookline High School will be presenting their school improvement plans, but it will start at 4:30. We will meet again after that on March 5th for our next curriculum meeting, and we have not set the agenda for that as yet.
Thank you, Ms. Scotto. Questions for Ms. Scotto? Hearing and seeing none. Ms. Stone is not here, as I explained before, and so I will just confirm with the rest of the committee that there is no report to be done regarding government relations. Dr. Warren, negotiations.
Very little to report. I think I reported last time that some meetings were set up. Those are still pending and will take place the week after next.
Great. Thank you. Are there additional liaisons that people would like to talk about at this time? Well, why don't I just say a few words about B-Space? Not too many, I hope. I'll try and discipline myself. We had a meeting this past Monday. It was a very lively and productive meeting. And we heard about various options for the long-term solution for our student growth crisis regarding a new school probably at Old Lincoln. We heard about ideas for a limited number of classes, for example, 7th and 8th grade. We even heard about just a single class, 8th grade. We heard about some specific concepts, STEM, for example, performing arts as another example, and a language concentration as another example. Any idea, any conclusion that we come to has to remain within the confines of financial feasibility as well as equity, and particularly with a specific concept where we would have to draw from the variety of K-8 schools that we have. That would require that the new school end up looking like our existing district in terms of its diversity and equity. We will continue those discussions. Those were just preliminary discussions. We have another meeting, which we may or may not do on Monday, the 25th, I think, of February, and we'll go from there. We are very sensitive to the time that it takes to do all this. We do have a couple of public meetings. We have a theoretical schedule, which we haven't put out yet, and we'll just do the best we can. I'm glad to answer questions. Ms. Charlevsky.
So if the meeting doesn't happen on the 28th, when would it happen?
The 25th?
25th, excuse me. Yeah.
Well, there are two choices. We might move it to another day close by, or we might just wait until the next meeting scheduled.
Which is?
Might be the 11th of March.
Okay, thank you.
Right. I was wondering what question you were going to ask because you were at the meeting.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to know what the next one was. I found it very interesting.
Any other questions? Okay. I think we're ready for public comment. Is there anyone signed up for public comment? No one is signed up for public comment. Is there anyone in the room who would care to make a public comment at this time? Seeing and hearing none, I'll assume that there aren't any, and we will move on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. You should have a copy of the report. With the two weather-related days that we experienced, our school calendar for most of our schools, all schools but Runkle, will now conclude on Thursday, June 27th, and the Runkle school is now slated to conclude, remember this is February 14th yet, on Monday, July the 1st. We have some issues around that schedule with the beginning of summer programming, particularly extended school year programming that we have to work at. We don't have answers to all those things yet, but we will. I believe, I don't know if school committee members received an invitation, I know we did, to the Abaya Shalom Gala, the third annual gala, where they will honor, among a couple of other individuals from their organization, Vicki Milstein, the principal of our early education program, and Bob Weintraub, the retired headmaster of Brookline High School. That's scheduled on March the 6th. If you need information on that, I can certainly get it to you. We're very pleased. I know you've probably seen some information on the Brookline Education Foundation Idea Lab. The Education Foundation came to us in the fall with the idea for another grant program to put out for teachers to write innovative and creative grants to implement 21st century classrooms. We're very excited. They're thrilled that they had 24 submissions. Again, that's the number that they normally receive for their teacher grant program. I've given you a little detail on this. I know later on in the year, I'm sure they'll present more detail on this as they talk with you about their overall grant program. But 21 proposals were funded. A number of those applications requested technology, software, equipment, and materials. They had a number of teachers apply who've never received BEF grants, which was a real positive for them. They saw grant applications that asked for tools for ELL, adaptive learning centers, literacy specialists, that looked at e-lending libraries, that looked at the concept of flipped classrooms and integrating Spark with academics. Linda Carlisle, first and foremost on this list, deserves a lot of credit for this concept and for the work on this concept, but her partners in crime on this were Ken Maloney and Benna Kolszewski. And along with Jennifer Fisher-Mueller and Amy Martin, who both sat on the group that looked at applications, I want to thank them for this great work that was so inspirational for so many of our teachers in looking to get funding for some innovative ideas that they had. You probably saw in the press, I think a couple of weeks ago, that the state auditor has issued a determination regarding the recently enacted act relative to student access to educational services and exclusion from schools, known among my colleagues as the discipline law. This is the piece that requires districts to provide alternative educational services to students who are under extended exclusion from school. Essentially says that students cannot be excluded from school any longer without providing educational services. No students. The state auditor has ruled that this particular law is an unfunded mandate. The act proposed funding the requirement through the general availability of Chapter 70 aid and additional circuit breaker aid, and the auditor ruled that that was not a sufficient means of funding the law. Interestingly enough, in their report, they estimated if the law were in effect today, the state would not provide a school district with additional funding for complying with the law until a per-student cost exceeded $38,000, $39,000. This law is not scheduled to be in place until 14-15, so we will wait and hear from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the legislature as to how they will react to the auditor's findings. You also probably saw an advisory that came out from the U.S. Department of Education, the Office of Civil Rights, concerning an existing, didn't frame it that way so much in the newspaper, it sounded new, but it is an existing legal obligation of school districts to provide students with disabilities with an equal opportunity to participate in extracurricular school sports. I've given you some of the detail on that. We've spoken briefly with Mr. Rittenberg about our compliance with that law. We believe that we do, that we meet the letter and spirit of the law. But I'm sure there'll be some additional work that we'll do in investigating where we stand relative to this advisory that was put out. Heidi Cook wrote to me this afternoon and thanked me for the inclusion in the in the report, which I sent on to principals. But some of you may know that Arlo Warren Cook was born on January 30th. Arlo weighed in at 9 pounds 8 ounces, and Heidi tells me again today that the entire family is doing well. I will be at the Minority Student Achievement Network Governing Board meeting on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. We're meeting in Phoenix. It's the first time we've strayed from Chicago or Madison, and one of our newer member districts is hosting that meeting in their district, and we're very much looking forward to that meeting there. The item that's not in my report that I just want to say real briefly is to thank people in the district, in this community, on this board, for your support over the last few weeks. It's been, as I told Mr. Morris, it's been deeply moving for my family and my mother. All the support that she's received, that we've received from this community on my father's passing. So thank you very much. Thanks.
Questions for Dr. Lapini? Seeing none, I will go back to something that I forgot toward the beginning of the agenda, and that is the out-of-state trip, for the rowing teams going to Georgia, which was not part of the consent agenda. I'm relieved that nobody noticed that I missed that. But yeah, please do.
So this is coming to you very late. I approved this a few weeks ago when we got it for them to move forward, because if we waited till tonight, they were obviously not going to be able to move forward. Both the headmaster and I have had conversations with the athletic director about getting these in a more timely fashion, particularly when they are these reoccurring trips. And this is a reoccurring event. There are a number of these, and he has indicated that he will do so. So my apologies for this coming to you so late.
And my understanding is that this is a fully funded, outside funded program as well. Are there any questions? Yes, Ms. Jalewski.
Just one question. In the past, they've gone to Austin, Texas. Do we know why they're going to Gainesville?
No idea.
Okay.
Actually, I think they've been to Florida as well.
You're right. Yep. I happened to see them in Austin, so that's why I remember it. I ran into them at the river. They were working hard.
I will accept a motion to approve the high school rowing team's trip to Gainesville, Georgia on February 16th. Ms. Kershaw, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Jalewski, for a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Okay, we have a second reading of the Bullying Prevention and Intervention Master Plan, which was so capably presented by Jennifer Fisher-Mueller last time. And it's the same, I believe, is it not?
It is.
So are there any questions that people would like to raise or bring up? Seeing none, I would accept a motion to accept the second reading. Ms. Cotto, thank you so much. Do I have a second? Ms. Ditkoff, I'm very grateful. Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. I'm not a nay, I'm just naying. Thank you. Sorry about that. Dr.
May I for just one moment?
Yes, please.
So I want to thank Dr. Fisher-Mueller, Dr. Allen, and Mindy Paulo, Ms. Paulo, for their really amazing work on this plan. We had a good plan 2 years ago that talked about what we were going to be able to do, and to see the work that they were able to put in to that plan in describing what we've been able to do over the last 2 years. I'm personally very appreciative of the efforts, because I know how much you put in above and beyond everything else that we ask you to do here. So thank you very much.
I second that motion. Okay. Dr. Lupini, a few words about our budget.
Yes? Oh, okay. So it's a night of thank yous, right? So thanks to the committee and to Mr. Rowe for making arrangements that we could do this scaled down version of the superintendent's message, which will be delivered on the 28th. So let me get the formal part of this out of the way. The formal part of this presentation is, and the part that's required by our town bylaws, is that we have, for me to inform you that we have received through the town school partnership an increase of $3.47 million to the public schools for use in the FY 2014 plan. And on the 28th, we will present you with the detail of that spending. But what I'll try to take you through tonight, fairly briefly, are some of the issues that we're dealing with, and that will be part of that discussion on the 28th. So you know that we started out in terms of looking in our enrollment projections at another large incoming kindergarten class. We started out in this work with an assumption of 660 students, a class as large as the group that we are currently working with this year. We've made some revision to that, and I'll comment on that in a bit. But it's still going to be a group that we believe will be north of 600 students. So the growth has continued, and we believe the acceleration in that growth has continued. That left us looking at a shortfall, depending on what we were including in our projections for expenditures, of somewhere between $1.5 and $2.5 million. We have examined a number of different elements, some of which I'll just comment on generally, some a little bit more specifically here this evening, along with some of the priorities that we've been discussing for inclusion in this spending plan. So we have looked very carefully at other sources of revenue. We have looked to take advantage, if you will, of what is a growing materials fee program. That is the program that allows our employees to enroll their children when they live outside of Brookline. And we've tried to factor in what we believe the increase in those numbers, and there will be an increase in the number of employees seeking that program. We believe that increase this year will be north of 20 So we continue, that program continues to increase. I think we reported to B-Space the other night that the program of town and school employees is presently around 168 students, I believe.
Yes.
And just for comparison's sake, when I came here in 2004, it was under 100 students. So it's grown on a pretty significant percentage basis over that time. And we project on some survey work that we've done with our employees alone, not the town employees, that it will continue to grow. We're looking at groups that could be 20 to 30 students for at least the next 3 to 4 years who will be applying and interested in having their children enroll. And so we can take advantage of some of that additional revenue generated by that program. Last year in the budget message, we talked with you about what food service pays in terms of their health insurance. And we laid out a plan for getting them, hopefully over time, if revenues continue to be positive, to a full pay of that health insurance. And even though revenues are not what we've had the last few years, we do believe we're going to be able to take advantage of what was laid out as a third year of that plan. We've had to look very carefully at the athletic fees in this budget. We've taken a close look at where our athletic fees fall in relation to the rest of, in particular, the Bay State Conference. And what I can report to you tonight is that we've noted that we are at the low end of those athletic fees. And I believe you can anticipate some recommendations for additional revenue through our athletic fee program. We've also taken a look at the way we collect fees. I mentioned that to you in an early budget presentation, that we were going to take a close look at how we collect fees for early education tuitions, how we collect athletic fees, and see if we were doing that in the most efficient manner. I don't believe we are, and I believe it can be done, it can be improved upon, and the revenue collection can be improved upon while still benefiting students who need and families who need scholarships. I've seen that program work before. I set it up in another district, and I believe we can do a similar thing here, and I anticipate that you'll be seeing a proposal in that area. And again, my apology here is that I'm a little bit all over the place. These things don't necessarily fit together. But in terms of some of our priority, one of our priorities, you've heard a number of times over the last few years about a very good thing that's happening. That is the increased use of technology at the high school by our teachers, since we now have a robust wireless environment. What you've also heard from our students is that there are some students who don't have the access that other students have. And I believe as we begin to consider what a one-to-one initiative might look like down the road in this district, that we can at least take into account in this spending plan some steps to make sure that all of our students are guaranteed that access. And we will put forward a recommendation in 2 weeks that we believe takes a good step in that direction. In terms of some of those other program improvements and innovation, I talked with you, I believe, when we first talked about a language-based learning disability instructional model at the high school. We talked about the number of students who are aging out of our elementary schools, particularly in 7th and 8th grade, and require that model if we want them to attend school in Brookline. And you've seen in our budget priorities over any number of years that we believe that the Brookline students should be in Brookline, in programs in Brookline. And we believe we can provide a quality LLD instructional model at the high school. We have some very specific recommendations, not inexpensive, to provide that learning environment for those students as we try to accommodate what looks like about 25 students, 6th grade through 8th grade over the next few years. And so there'll be very specific recommendations in that area. We will make recommendations to continue our work in the Literacy Collaborative. That is in terms of the work that we've done at the elementary level, in terms of the Literacy Collaborative work with Lesley University. Many of you know of the work that the 21st Century Fund did a number of years ago to fund advisory at the high school. This year, I'm very pleased to say that Amy Martin has worked closely with the 21st Century Fund to evaluate and revise that program. And we believe we've now got something which we would strongly recommend including in our spending plan going forward. That will be part of our discussions next week. Of course, where growth's concerned, We have a number of issues. We have, for the sake of the spending plan for next year, when you see it in 2 weeks, scaled our projection for FY14 based on our entire first round of enrollment at our elementary schools. We've scaled that projection back to 600 students. We feel comfortable with that number based on what we've seen in the first round of enrollment. That's still a large group, and in case we're wrong, you'll see that we believe we've made a pretty significant commitment to contingency in case, as we get to other markers, we've made an error. But we don't believe we have. We believe now we have enough history in this 9-year run of ours to look at initial enrollments and make some pretty solid projections as to where the size of a kindergarten will end up. What I can't tell you is where. To the points you were making earlier, Ms. Charlevsky, I can't tell you where. I wish I could, because when I look back at 2 years where the overall number was very similar to where it sits today, every one of those years had vastly different profiles within the schools, right? And this one does as well. This one does as well. One school that has a group that's much larger than it was last year, and it's the only one school that has a group that's larger than last year, is Pierce. And it's much larger. And so what does that say about the number of sections that we may end up with? The other thing we haven't started to do with any of those numbers yet is start to tear them apart in terms of what's core, what's buffer zone, those kinds of issues. But we're pretty confident about the projection that we've made, again, while making a pretty good contingency fund available in case we're wrong. But even at that leads to, since we have growth now in the 7th and 8th grade, we've projected, let me just say this, let me back up 1 second. That's 3 kindergarten teachers less than we have this year, 600 students. But our increase in the other grade levels, based on students moving up, is 8.2 FTE moving up, along with 3 elementary classroom specialists moving up. So there's still quite an increase in staffing that accompanies the growth in the other grade levels. We have a number of issues that we will address in this spending plan that address growth outside of the sectioning. So there will be additional recommendations as there were last year, around issues like vice principal, nursing, and team facilitation, at least those areas. Because schools have reached that point where we believe that to do, for example, with vice principals, the work that needs to be done in evaluation and supervision of students, the one VP doesn't suffice for some of those larger schools. As I said, we believe we've been pretty aggressive with contingencies in terms of taking advantage in special education of a fairly significant aging out population that we've been able to take advantage of in terms of factoring part of our contingency, and then identifying some of our reserves as additional contingency. Let me back up and make a comment about reserves. There is the same amount in terms of reserves in this budget that you'll be presented with next 2 weeks that we budgeted last year. That is $350,000. There's about $750,000 available in reserves. So that leaves a balance of $400,000, which we've indicated is available, as it always is, right, for special education contingency. There is also funding in the budget itself for special ed contingency. And then I mentioned that general education contingency. I need to mention that as you know, the cost of collective bargaining is $3.5 million in this budget. That's $2.3 million in terms of the cost of the collective bargaining agreement itself, the 2%, the additional step, and $1.2 million in steps and lanes. That's partially offset by what we anticipate being about $450,000 in savings from anticipated retirements and other staff turnover, but it still leaves the net cost of this agreement at about $3.1 million. We have a number of budget freeze items from this year that will be restored. Not all. That is, we froze about $500,000 worth of spending and the proposal will be to restore about $100,000 of that spending, a number of positions, which I'll go over with you in more detail in 2 weeks. There are a number of issues where there will be reductions, that's obvious, and there will be staff reduced in this spending plan. What I've said in almost every forum that I've done is that the staff, the positions that are reduced are not classroom positions. We do not believe, based on our projections, that we will change our class sizes by 1 student. We believe that those class sizes will remain where they've been, but we've had very serious discussions about every position that is not a direct classroom position. That is a classroom teacher, a first grade teacher, a science teacher in 7th grade, whatever that may be, which means that we've had discussions about our literacy specialists, but I told you we've actually enhanced the literacy initiative that's underway, about our math specialists, about performing arts, about enrichment and challenge support, about tutorial. All of those issues have been on the table. The other issue that's been up for discussion is our coordinator structure. And we've taken a hard look at our coordinator structure and where we may be able to make reductions to make this budget work. All of those items are on the table and will be, in one form or another, a number of them will be part of this spending plan for reductions in 2 weeks. I do want to mention a couple of other things that I think are really important in terms of commitments that we've continued, because these things get left out from message to message. We will continue to fund our paraprofessional and intern program in K and 1. We believe we've seen great benefit in, and it's one thing for me to say in terms of a more control of the number of paraprofessionals. That's not the issue. I mean, that's a budgetary issue. It's not an instructional improvement issue. We believe our paraprofessionals are now better deployed in the service of students, being in the K and 1 area. We've seen less continuation of one-to-ones in upper grades. We've seen less need for shared pairs in most cases in upper grades. And we believe it's directly attributable to that K and 1 model and the support that's provided for students in both pre-K and in grade K and grade 1. And that's funded again in this spending plan. The town's been very helpful to us in taking a number of technology initiatives and building them in to the capital improvement plan. A lot of work around our LLD support. The support for that instructional model is included in the capital improvement plan. You'll see that in 2 weeks. Completing our wireless plan. The 3rd year of our wireless plan is included in that capital plan. Some of the work that we need to do in educator evaluation with TeachPoint and the iPads is included in the capital improvement plan. And I want to thank Kevin Stokes and Sean Cronin for their great work on building about $175,000 worth of those expenditures into the capital improvement plan. I also want to mention there's a continued focus on the virtual high school plan that we put in place, on curriculum revisions, particularly in science and social studies, a continuation and enhancement of our special education team facilitator model. I said our kindergarten and first grade pairs. Last year we took funding over from the 21st Century Fund of the African American Scholars Program. That remains in our budget. There remains a serious commitment to the 4+1 and tutorial model at the high school. Today's students, tomorrow's teachers. We actually will recommend in this spending plan the addition of a 2nd cohort of students. For next year, you remember we have one cohort of 5 students. They're now in 10th grade. We'll actually recommend adding a 2nd group and continued funding for the calculus project. We have an improvement and restoration list in this spending plan should additional funding become available, whether it's through some improvement on the town's position relative to the governor's proposal, or whether it's through the health insurance numbers that we receive. I will tell you that one very serious commitment that we've made in terms of additional funding that may become available that we will recommend to you is funding of technology to continue to bring our classrooms up to the standard that we've identified over the past number of years. The term I've taken to using around the proposal that we're identifying is leapfrogging. We can continue to sort of whittle away at this, and we're not getting to where we need to be. We've we've taken a look at what it would take to bring all of our classrooms up to the minimum standard where we want to be so that we can start talking about what those improvements will be down the road and what the funding that will be available to do that in the capital improvement plan. And Mr. Cronin's been very, very open to those conversations. If we can bring ourselves up to that minimum standard, we're going to try. We're going to try. So that's sort of an overview of where we'll be in a few weeks. It's there is no magic answer in the next 2 weeks. As I said, there may be some funding down the road when the legislature gets done considering the governor's proposals, although I think the town's taken a very realistic view in terms of factoring in about a $1.7 million increase to Chapter 70, which is the increase we saw last year. It's a pretty realistic view. There may be some increased funding available through a health insurance number that's better than 5%. In fact, most of us think that will occur. But that's not going to allow us to escape from what is a very, very difficult budget as we try to accommodate for this collective bargaining agreement, as we try to accommodate the growth that we're seeing. And as I said, they're most certainly, I've sat before you a number of times on budgets and said there may be staffing reductions, but they're going to be done through attrition and in other ways. That is not going to be the case in this budget. More in 2 weeks. Be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lupini. Dr. Warren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Bill. That was a very good report. I have a question about the budget freeze for this year. You say you're going to restore 100,000 of that, and the 400,000 that's not restored will constitute a cut. Would that be? Well, I guess that's a question. And if that is, will that be? Will that 400,000 be first in line for restoration?
No, not necessarily. Some of them are items that, quite frankly, didn't get into the conversation for restoration. They were positions that existed this year that might not have existed. They were expenditures that have been built back in one way or another, or changes that have been made in practice. Probably the largest of them, and the most serious from our perspective, that's not on a restoration list, is the Director of Data Management position, which constituted about a fourth of that difference. What we've done is worked very closely with our budget analyst in special education, who's picked up some of the real core functions of that position. We're comfortable with that moving forward. It's not the best system. It doesn't provide us with the full array of information we need in decision making that we were getting from the position when Oscar held it. But quite frankly, in these very difficult times where we're proposing other cuts, we think this is a doable model.
Go ahead.
So in some of the school improvement plans that we've been hearing about, we've heard that there's a pretty substantial requirement for time spent by school administrators with regard to the bullying program, and do you feel that the budget adequately takes those personnel requirements into consideration and supports the school administrations?
No, except that we've had some pretty thoughtful conversations with principals about, in particular, some of the schools that are over the 6 or 650 number of students, or corresponding numbers of staff, and that's where we've made some of these recommendations about additional support with vice principals. So, yes and no. I don't think we ever get completely at that issue, and I think what they probably said is what I've heard them say, that some of this runs in waves. Right, there can be, you can have 3 or 4 of those on your desk today, and then as with one principal I was with today, go 4 or 5 weeks where there isn't a conversation about any of that, and then be back in 2 or 3 of them at a time. So it's hard to predict that. I think what we've tried to do through additional kinds of supports from coordinators around evaluation, what we've tried to do by making the one change in the vice principal structure at Devotion that we made last year, and 2 others that we will propose in this budget, is to provide supports where principals have the largest caseload of teachers to evaluate and students to work with.
Just one more. Is there some communication between all the schools' administrations and the data analyst about the incidence of bullying, when it occurs, what grades it occurs, and all that sort of stuff, so that we can begin to get some kind of handle?
So our reporting mechanism during that first 2 years was not where it should be. I mean, we had anecdotal reports, we got paper copies, et cetera. But we've built in this new billing plan, as I think you probably saw, we've built a reporting mechanism in there through the Student Service Office to make sure that we have that kind of information. And yes, I'm sure that Chris Nunes will be involved in that process.
Thank you.
Ms. Cholowski?
Thank you for your report. It's a difficult pill to swallow right now. I'm hoping that some of the things that you talked about that might turn more positive will, and that certainly will help to make the pain less, though I think there will be some pain. I was just wondering if there was any class consolidations that you thought might happen in addition to the hopeful 3 classrooms of kindergarten.
Sure, great question, thank you. So what we do at this time of the year is, and we've done this a few times in budgets, is we take a look at where we think there may be possibilities, and then we assume conservatively, right? That's the best we can do in February. So we've identified 3 or 4 places where that may happen, and this budget does assume 1 consolidation. And that's about the best we can do now. If we do better than that, that's great. That's more for our contingency fund against what may happen in the summer enrollment and or in that kindergarten. But that's a model that's actually worked for us in the past.
Ms. Sitkoff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the overview and the direction. I just want to reiterate something quickly that I said a couple weeks ago, just to the concern about the gradual chipping away process. And if one were to think about what a fully funded school looked like 5 years ago, even on a per student basis, the ratios that we would like to be able to see between, not so much classroom teacher, I feel like we've been very, very disciplined about class sizes, but ratios of specialists, ratios of non-specialists, other people in the building like guidance counselors and whatnot, ratios of vice principals, the infrastructure we need. I mean, I think it's impossible to imagine a district with this much growth in enrollment and this little growth in revenue that there aren't going to be implications on the quality of the education that we can provide. And I think we have an amazing staff who does remarkable work and spins straw into gold, but at the same time, just the level of resources available relative to the enrollment we have are compromised compared to what they were 5 years ago. So I just think it's worth all of our thinking about that, and I appreciate that your attempt to have the budget be about something and the innovation and trying to move things, some pieces of our priorities forward. And at the same time, I do feel like there's this chipping away process that concerns me. I'm not sure I have a great answer, and we probably won't in 2 weeks, but it concerns me.
Other comments? I also want to thank you, Dr. Lupini, for the report, and I guess to reiterate a little bit what Ms. Ditkoff just said. I remember the Finance Committee, subcommittee meeting we had where people really felt some pain about this, that, or the other thing, including me. And it made us all realize that whatever we can do, including funding some new initiatives, there is going to be some serious pain, particularly for the students, as we move forward the way things stand now. And I think it's important for the public to know that.
If, just timeline-wise, Ms. Kershaw mentioned a finance meeting at 5 o'clock on the 27th, which is the day before we present this, where we'll talk in, I think, some detail about the proposal. You'll certainly have it before then, and sort of tee up the presentation then for the 28th, as well as where we may go from there. That's our goal.
So you probably all noticed that in the various subcommittees, we left out the policy discussion, not knowing whether Ms. Stone would be here or not. She is not, and I believe that Dr. Warren is well prepared to pick up the cudgel. We have actually one, the number 4, the proposed PSB policy on criminal history checks of employees, volunteers, and others off the table at the present time.
Ready for the 28th, I'm told.
They'll be ready for the 28th. Right. And so, Dr. Warren,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
you're up.
So there are, sorry. Oh, yes. Do you want to wait till I announce it before you, or do you, no?
I don't know.
Okay, the way there are 3 items, and Ms. Kershaw, I think, previously recused herself from consideration of the policy on reporting suspected child abuse or neglect, and the policy on physical restraint. Those were the 2. And those will begin with that, and then we'll send somebody out to pick you up.
Thank you. Dr. Warren, I just want to state for the record that due to my employment with the Department of Children and Families, I've been advised by counsel to recuse myself, and I'd like the record to reflect that I'm recusing myself from deliberations and votes on both the policy related to reporting suspected abuse and neglect and the use of physical restraint. Thank you.
We will miss you, Ms. Kershaw, but we understand that you don't want to break the law.
Okay, so there are, the first item is the proposed revision of the Public Schools of Brookline policy on reporting suspected child abuse or neglect. This is a second reading. The policy was presented last time. There is a change. There's a phrase added to the last part of it. I'll read the entire paragraph. The superintendent or his or her designee shall develop procedures for reporting suspected child abuse and neglect that are consistent with general laws, chapter 119, section 51A, for informing teachers, administrators, and other professional staff of the mandated reporting requirements. And this is the new part. Comma, and for providing appropriate staff with training in recognizing and reporting suspected child abuse or neglect. So, well, that's a significant change. It's not something that's difficult to apprehend, so we felt it would be reasonable to go ahead with this as a second reading, and so I make the motion to adopt this revised reporting section E2E, reporting suspected child abuse or neglect.
So you've heard the motion, and I would welcome a second. Thank you very much, Mr. Chang. All those in favor say aye. Oh, sorry. I apologize. Discussion, please. Please, Ms. Ditkoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one note on this in particular. I mean, I think the training part is really important. I'm supportive of the motion, but as the procedures get developed, I do think the training part is incredibly important, just because how one asks questions to children, especially young children, in cases of child abuse is of the utmost importance and care, and not creating or implanting memories or that sort of thing. So the procedures here are incredibly important, and the training piece is really important. So I just put that out there.
Great. And I apologize. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you. The second policy is second reading. I think they're all second readings. This is on physical restraint, and there are no changes from the prior version that was presented on the 31st of January. So I'd like to make the motion that the committee vote to adopt the revised section J7K, physical restraint.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second? Ms. Spotto? And is there discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. We are then to the third proposed policy having to do with the assignment of students to school buffer zones,
Thank you.
and would give the superintendent temporary authority to locate classrooms off-site.
So
We ought to
we're
get
just going to,
Ms.
yeah.
Kershaw, right.
she's being
I agree to
retrieved.
that.
So the item that's under consideration now is an item to be added to the end of the current policy, section J1E, assignment of students to schools/buffer zones. And this item, this new language, unchanged since the first reading last meeting, will be appended to buffer zones, and it consists of a paragraph that I think we read out last time. I don't. There are no changes. I don't see the need to detail the contents of it. There is a, so I'd like to make that motion, and then I have a presentation, or not a presentation, but some formulated questions and answers that a number of the members worked on. So I don't know whether that comes as part of the discussion.
It will become as part of the discussion because
So
we
I'll
can't.
make the motion to.
Thank you. We need a second before we can have the discussion. Thank you. Do I have a second? Mr. Chang, thank you very much. Now, is there discussion?
I think there is.
Great.
So this policy, what does it do? It provides the superintendent authority to find alternative physical locations for a classroom, principally in a different Brookline school, public school, if such option is necessary to alleviate overcrowding in the children's assigned school. So then under what circumstances might the superintendent do this? It's a last resort option to avoid dramatic increases in class sizes, which the school committee has not approved. It would be implemented only if no new spaces could be carved out of an existing school facility. Existing buffer zone assignments do not address the need, and modular or other temporary on-site facilities are deemed either unworkable or insufficient. Would a classroom ever be placed by itself in a rental space? And the answer to that is no. The superintendent would see this as mostly as an option temporarily to locate a classroom in another of our elementary schools if there is space available for that purpose. Why ask for the authority now if it's not needed at the moment? I guess this is prior notice is one answer to that. We would never want to use this option, but our extraordinary growth and the circumstances next year at two schools, in Baker and Lawrence, where we have no more space to use or create, have made it more urgent that we have additional options at the superintendent's disposal. If modulars won't solve the problems at those schools, the only alternative is to increase class sizes. School committee believes that moving a classroom temporarily is preferable to large increases in school classroom size. Which grades might be affected? The superintendent has agreed that if the option is exercised, it will be used for kindergarten because those students have not yet formed connections in the school building. Parents of older children need not be worried that their child will be suddenly yanked out of this school that they've been accustomed to and sent to a different one. How is this different from assigning a student outside of his or her core buffer assignment district? A different school assignment is permanent or forever. This is a different location for 1 year. School assignment remains the same and students will still join their neighborhood school. Years ago when Baker School was overcrowded, we did cap enrollment and assigned a number of core area families to a different school permanently. That was extremely painful for the families and for the district, and we would want to avoid such a move again. When we expanded the buffer zones last year, we did so in order to increase the flexibility of core assignments and ask more families to accept the ambiguity of placement at possibly 2 or even 3 schools. And we're committed to honoring those assignment areas, and that's why we're constraining this authority to a maximum of 2 years. So, question, what are the criteria for assigning students to a satellite classroom? We do not have the specifics on this question, but important considerations will be given to the following factors and possibly others. Recommendations from the principal and the guidance staff at the school, older siblings already enrolled in a school, ELL programs offered at a particular school building, distance for families to the alternative school that might affect whether or not the public schools have to pay for transportation. And the distance is 1.5 miles. Question, if it's still considered a classroom from the sending school, which school does it belong to for supervision, PTO, and extended day? The answer is the move is only workable if the class is treated as a regular classroom in the school building in which it resides for the time that it spends there. Question, are transitions bad for student learning? The school committee and the public schools know that limiting the number of school transitions for children benefits their learning, and that's guided our commitment to the K-8 model, and it informed our move to bring pre-Ks into the elementary schools. But because of the enrollment crunch, we've had to move pre-Ks out of most of our buildings. Despite the disruption of transition, we may be forced to accept the same for some kindergarten classes on a temporary basis. The policy says a maximum of 2 years. Does that mean students could spend 2 years in a different school? If they did, could they loop with the same teacher? Answer, our hope is that we will only have to exercise this option, if at all, for 1 year. We don't yet know, should the need extend beyond 1 year, if the same class would stay for a second year, or if we would move them back and put another incoming kindergarten class at another location. Many factors will go into that decision, and the possibility of looping would be one factor to be considered. Questions. Open enrollment allows families to petition to attend school other than their attendance district or buffer school. If temporarily sighted students wish to remain in the off-site school, would they be allowed? Like any family, they could apply to attend the other school under open enrollment. The decision would be made in the same way it is made for any such application, principally based on class size at the school they wish to attend. Question. When will the public hear about which option is going to be chosen? As we've all heard earlier this evening, the district has gotten and continues to get data on a weekly basis throughout the enrollment period, and that will inform decision-makings on an ongoing basis. And depending upon enrollments, it may not be just one option, maybe all of the above. That said, we will know more about our kindergarten enrollments by the end of February. Well, we know some of it now. And we'll be hearing in the spring from the architects chosen to look at the feasibility on modular classrooms at Lawrence and Baker schools. And finally, we'll have a second round of enrollment in July. All of that detail will factor into the final decisions. We will get information out to the public in a timely way. So the last question is how can parents stay informed and involved?
You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Stone.
The school committee welcomes input from parents and encourages it. In your school, both the school council and the PTO have regular open meetings with the principal, who is the best source of information about these decisions and the timeline. Parents are urged to attend these meetings and ask their questions there. The school committee also welcomes public comment at its meetings and through email to the committee or the chair. Finally, the superintendent will be in most of the schools at superintendent fora and in front of the public at budget forums over the course of the spring. And these issues will no doubt be a prominent topic of discussion. And that's all that's been manufactured for me, so we'll have to wing it for now.
Nicely done, Dr. Warren, and nicely done, Ms. Stone. Other comments or questions? Ms. Chalupsky.
I have one question, or maybe it's a statement. I'm not sure it's really a question because I'm not sure you can answer it in the abstract, but there are some children whose families don't have cars, and I would hope that when they're placed in a classroom, that's thought about, that they wouldn't have to go any further than what they presently have to go to their district school, to their in-district school.
And again, I'm sorry I wasn't part of this conversation 2 weeks ago. So let me just make a couple comments about what's here and some questions I was asked when the policy subcommittee met and those kinds of things. So first of all, I want to emphasize that this is an absolute last resort. Those words can't be underlined enough on this. The one other piece I would add is under what circumstances might the superintendent do this once we've exhausted the potential in moving out of pre-K. That's another piece that isn't included on this list, but there are some schools left where we've not had conversations about this concept at all because, quite frankly, there are pre-Ks left in those buildings. What I said at that policy committee meeting that morning, to your point, is that this has to be done very carefully, and it meant people won't want to hear that in some cases when it happens, it might happen very late. But it has to be done very carefully in terms of who might fit into that group that might be moved. Would they be buffer zones? Would they be students who moved in last? I mean, all those kinds of things. People who might live closer to the school that where we might be moving the class to. To your point, I think in all cases we would be looking at, you know, what is the next best school, and for what population out of that school to make this work for 1 year. There are some more natural kinds of linkages that might work for a year. I don't see this going beyond a year. We've had these conversations. All these conversations start to interrelate, which I think is a good thing. So we have conversations about the next school, whatever that school configuration may be. If indeed that school, if we're looking at that school in 14-15, under any of the configurations that we've talked about, there are enough classrooms created where this would no longer be necessary. So this is a very short. This is part of that short-term plan. This is part of that short-term plan, and it has to be done very carefully, and it has to be done. It has to really take all those issues that you laid out and are included in here. Thank you for all of you who put pieces of this together. all those things have to be taken into account as we would make any of these decisions. And just as we've done when we've invited people to move, you remember the years some of you were on the committee, some of you were just watching from PTO, right? The years when we invited people from one school to go to another, we were very open and transparent with the community, with all the people involved in that particular grade level, and this would be a kindergarten initiative when and if it occurred. And we were very open about what we were doing and why we were doing it and what people had as a decision-making model for themselves, both short and long term. That is, when the Runkle issue occurred, those people knew that if they chose to remain at the Driscoll School, that if we had space, they could. And many of them are still there. They didn't go back. And some chose to. So it was an option for them. I don't see this operating in a dissimilar way at all. So that's what I can bring to this. I'd be glad to try to answer any questions about implementation of this that you might have as well.
I have a question about implementation, actually. I was wondering at what level of overcrowding you would consider this option?
Well,
how much overcap?
It's a good question. It's essentially not a cap. It's essentially, we don't have a classroom left. We don't have a way to create a classroom, and we've got an extra section of kindergarten, essentially.
So just when all options have been exhausted?
When all other options, including use of the buffer zones, including inviting people to look at other schools through open enrollment, when all of those have been exhausted, then we might have to employ this.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Ms. Tome?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate Dr. Warren pinch hitting for me on this one, and apologize to everybody. I just want, this has maybe already been said, but because there has been so much angst about this, understandably, from the community, I think it's just important to acknowledge that this, along with the public conversation about modulars, along with the public conversation about long-term planning, the B-Space Committee, all of the things that the public is starting to hear about, and of course different people hear about things at different points in the conversation. This is a great deal of uncertainty that's being visited all at once on the school's community, and I really appreciate everything that's done to inform the community about it, to involve the school groups that may be subject to some of these decisions, and I just want to keep on emphasizing how important that piece is, because we cannot underestimate how distressing this is to the families when they just hear pieces of it, and some of them only hear pieces of the news from someone else, and so the more we can provide specifics, the more it can be the subject of conversation at the schools themselves. I think the better off everybody's going to be.
Agreed.
Ms. Kershaw?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess I just wanted to say a couple things in response to the comments. One is I'm not opposed to modulars, and I'm not even necessarily opposed to moving classrooms out, but I think there are two things that strike me as still unresolved that make this premature for me. One is it is not actually part of a short-term plan that has a number of things in it that people can look at and read, and that it has a package of policy changes that go with that. We're going to do modulars, we're going to do this, here's the decision tree that we're going to use, and it's part of a whole plan that people can look at and understand and figure out what might happen in a detailed, comprehensive way. And therefore, the school committee can engage in that and take action on necessary policies if they're needed to affect those changes and to give that discretion when needed. We're doing it a piece at a time. It's trickling out. We're responding. So at the same time that we're asking for the B-Space Committee to do our long-term plan, we probably do need a more concrete, detailed short-term plan that describes the different kinds of options by school, so people know as they're enrolling and as they're thinking about their younger kids coming in or moving or whatever it is they're doing, that they have a sense of what the impact is. And the other thing I want to say is that I think informing the community and engaging in a process are really different things, and I think we have to be careful not to mistake them as the same. And I'm not I think we have done a really good job of generally being transparent, and I do think we're in the schools, and the superintendent does a great job of coming out for forums and those kinds of things. And all of that, telling people what's going on, is really different than engaging in a community process about decision-making and impact and hearing from the community about that. So.
Thank you, Ms. Kershaw. Any other comments? Okay, it's time to vote. So all those in favor of the proposed policy, please raise your hands. Thank you. And all of those who are opposed, please raise your hand. Thank you very much. No abstentions? Anybody want to abstain? No. Okay, so the ayes have it. Thank you very much. Now, I have to inform you that we need an executive session this evening. And we need an executive session both to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining and with respect to litigation in a situation where an open meeting might have a detrimental effect on either of those. And so we will go into executive session, providing you vote in the affirmative. And then if we have done that, then we will not come back into open session here at the committee. So, Ms. Coyne, could you poll the committee, please?
Ms. Charlevsky? Yes. Mr. Chang? Yes. Ms. Stone? Yes. Dr. Warren? Yes. Ms. Kershaw? Yes. Ms. Cox? Yes. Ms. Scotto? Ms. Dickoff?
Yes.
Yes.